Okay, we're live. Okay, right. Welcome, members, officers, and any members of the public who are joining us. Let's start. Ms. Willis, any apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. There are no apologies.
Thank you. Members of the executive, are you happy for me to sign the minutes of the 14th of February 23? Okay. Okay, do we have any declarations? That's for members of the executive and any members joining us. Anything we're going to be discussing? Okay, thank you. All right, item 4, any questions by members for either myself as leader or any of the portfolio holders? No. Okay, thank you. Right. Straight on to item 5 then, Economic Development Strategy 23 to 28. Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Leader. As part of the Council's 5-year strategy and annual action plan, it was agreed that a new economic development strategy would be produced to support economic recovery and growth in the borough. The paper is approval from the executive of that strategy. Officers have worked closely with an expert economic growth agency to produce the strategy over the last couple of months, and we believe that we now have a strategy that is relevant for Surrey Heath and takes into account current state of the local, national and global economy. Sitting beneath the strategy are a series of action plans that will be used to deliver the strategic objectives outlined within the report. It is our intention that regardless of the economic climate, these objectives will still be relevant. However, we will need to flex the action plans to ensure that we are delivering the right priorities for businesses and residents. It is fair to say that since the previous economic development strategy was approved, we've seen a huge economic shock and huge changes to the way our economy operates. For example, some sectors such as aerospace, advanced manufacturing have declined. However, we've seen a rise in industries such as the film and creative sector, along with pharmaceuticals and health. We also seen a drastic change in working habits driven from home working as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. As I said, officers have worked over the last few months to develop this strategy, which is reinforced by a large evidence base. They've consulted with some businesses, commercial agents, other Surrey Heath teams, the County Council and the LEP to shape the priorities for this strategy. We've been conscious to make this a borough-wide strategy, and although it recognises that Camberley is the hub for economic activity, over 24% of the economy is based in more rural areas, and therefore we have incorporated priorities that are important across the borough. I would like to thank everybody involved in putting this document together for all their hard work. I hope you'll join me with supporting the recommendations, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Garrett. Any questions for Councillor Garrett on the economic development strategy? I've seen a number of these over the years, and this is really, really comprehensive. And although every single one has started with, these are difficult economic times, right? And then it goes on to name the bank collapsing or the credit crunch or the war, or there's never an easy economic time. Okay, it doesn't look like there's any questions. Oh, sorry, Councillor Malvaginam, sorry.
Unfortunately, Leader, I do have a question for you, one or two of the questions. I'll start with a simple one. I mean, this is for the 23 to 28 period, and I presume that falls into the next council rather than this current council sitting. So do you think it's a good idea to actually leave the decision for the next council rather than for this council to take a decision, pass it to the full council, get it approved, and for it to sit there? At the same, I also want to highlight, which you had just said. I mean, if you look at the 18 to 23 plan, the strategy, we had the COVID. But what I can't understand, the COVID was only from 2020 to 2021, or in that period, about 18 months or less. Yep. and it has had a major impact. And also the retail sector has significantly changed. I know you have hopefully taken everything into account. The third point I want to make and ask you, has this been consulted widely with the existing councillors? Very clearly, the officers have done the job. They have taken advice from external people. Maybe we should also ask the current existing councillors for their opinion before you actually get it to the exec. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Marvaganam. I'll take a couple of those. The first one, there's always an interesting position about a council which is coming to the end of its term versus the new one. I take the view that I think most councils do, that we need to take the information that we've got now and set the economic strategy moving forward, because the new council, when it joins, has the ability to look at that and decide whether it's going to review it or whatever. But I think that it's only right that the work has been done in this council during this term, and the document is ready to go and the officers need to be getting onto it. So I take the view that there are not many things that I think the outgoing council should actually leave to the incoming council. I think it should set the document ready for the new council to review in their own time and decide whether they want to keep it, adopt it, scrap it, or amend it. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one, I couldn't agree more that retail has gone through an awful time. Just so you know, COVID was 2021 to 22, but its effects are going to be felt for the next 10 years, let alone, I don't think anybody can say COVID was only an 18-month period. People are still reeling from COVID now, not only in terms of people being ill, but also the financial damage to the country. And this document, and I'm sure you've read it as I have, this document goes into a great deal of detail about how we're going to support retail. And I'll be honest with you, I think that retail, I've heard experts say that bricks and mortar retail is dead and it's only ever going to be online now from now on. And I've heard people say that bricks and mortar retail is actually making a comeback. Footfall is climbing again and people are just looking for different retail. I think they call it leisure retail. And what this document does is it lays out a path where whichever way retail goes, we're going to be in a position to support it. So I'm okay with those two. In terms of current councillors and who we've consulted with, Councillor Garrett? Yeah.
Thank you, Leader. So we've consulted with local businesses throughout Surrey Heath. The officers have obviously worked on this with the advisor we got in, who, when I spoke to him, he knew Surrey Heath extremely well, and then I realised he doesn't live in Surrey Heath at all. But if you didn't know that, you wouldn't realise that, because what he knew about Surrey Heath was very, very good. It's also quite key, as I've mentioned, as you say, in the paper it says a lot about what we're looking at, but it's also, retail isn't the only thing in Surrey Heath, and we need to be really conscious of the fact that retail isn't the only thing in Surrey Heath. And it's not just Camberley-centric. As it says in the stats, 24% of the businesses within Surrey Heath are outside of the town, or in the rural areas. So from that respect, we're looking at all areas. Have we consulted with other councillors? No. I've spoken with the officers. I've looked at this. I know it's gone round lots of departments. I know I've shared it with yourself as well. But the officers are the ones that are on the day-to-day dealing with this plan, and they believe it to be a good plan. And also, this isn't set in stone. It will be metamorphosed as things move along. So as things change, then this will obviously have to change. So it isn't a set in stone document. So, and I think what we need to do is have something in place for the new council when we start back after May. So I would happily recommend this to go to full council.
I think, thank you, Councillor Garrett. I think I'd just add as well, the officers take account of what's discussed at the Camberley Town Centre Working Group, the Property Investment Working Group, the Villages Working Group, the Local Plan Working Group, which are all cross-party, and you're probably looking at about 60%, 70% of the councillors are on those working groups. So they may not have come out and said, Councillor Marvaganam, you know, what's your view on this? But I think there's been enough where we've taken into account people's views. I like to give the questioner the final say. Councillor Marvaganam?
I hear what you say, but I still feel that this paper is, you're hurrying this paper instead of actually having a little bit more consultation with the councillors and putting it out there at the appropriate time, which I believe is a new council. I mean, you're the exec, you make the decisions, but that's an opinion I have. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. All right. Who knows, Councillor Marvaganam, what the new executive may decide to do. But I'm sure we'll have a look at that and we'll decide what's going to happen. Okay. Members of the executive, there's no other questions, then we are advised to resolve the Economic Development Strategy 23 to 28 is set out in Annex 1 to the report be agreed, and 2, authority be delegated to the Head of Investment and Development in consultation with the portfolio holder for economic development and transformation to make minor amendments to the strategy should it be required. Are we agreed? Thank you. Okay, item 6, UK Shared Prosperity Fund Year 1 and 2 projects. Again, Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Leader. The really good news is that the investment plan that was submitted in the summer was approved by the government in January, and we've been awarded the full £1 million. This is split over 3 financial years, including the one we are currently in, with the bulk of the funding coming in March 2024. We've now received the funding for year 1, and the report provides an update on the projects that were agreed in the summer of 22. Broad success, however, it is worth noting that a few projects have been delayed, and we have had approval from the government to carry this funding forward, subject to a robust delivery plan, which we believe we have. These were delayed partly due to government's delay in announcing the success of the application, as well as the schemes being part of a broader capital programme led by the council. The way in which the fund is administered is that we have a series of government interventions that we have committed to delivering. These were chosen in the summer at the most appropriate for Surrey Heath, and as said, we've approved by the government in mid-January. The projects that we are seeking approval from Executive for are listed in Year 2 document. Some of these have changed slightly over the past couple of months to take on board feedback from officers and myself. We have around £80,000 to spend in the next financial year and are keen to start these projects as soon as possible. You may also see in the report that we are suggesting that the report is taken to Executive in September 23 to agree the projects for 24. This will give officers enough time to mobilise these projects and start as soon as possible in April 24. Once again, I would like to thank everybody involved in putting this document together and for all their hard work. I hope you will join me in supporting the recommendations, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Any questions for Councillor Garrett on this paper? Okay. Right. Members of the exec, we are advised to resolve that the progress made in Year 1 projects funded through the UK SPF are set out in Annex 1 be noted. Year 2 projects to be funded through UK SPF are set out in Annex 2 to the report be agreed. And finally, authority be delegated to the Head of Investment and Development in consultation with the portfolio holder for economic development transformation to make any minor amendments to the Year 2 project programme should it be necessary. Are we agreed? Thank you. Okay. Surrey Heath Local Development Scheme 2326, Councillor Page.
How about that one? Thank you very much. Now that you can hear me, thank you for introducing this, Leader. So the local development scheme, well, as you can imagine, We were all set to put forward our local plan, and then we had a letter from government which suggested that we need to adjust, and we have adjusted. You'll all be aware, following the announcement of the imminent consultation on planning reforms in December 22, a decision was taken to delay the publication of our Regulation 19 local plan until there was more certainty over the changes. A new timetable has been prepared, and it sets out a document called the Surrey Heath Local Development Scheme, and you will see that as attached as an annex to these papers. The officers have worked extremely hard on some of the work that's already been done, and let me remind everybody that this was a cross-party group that have come to the conclusion that we're in the right direction with our local plan, and we've done all that we can to prepare it in such a way as the inspectors who will review it will pass it. The new timetable reflects the fact that the National Planning Policy Framework proposed changes are expected to be published later on in spring, so imminently, to take effect 3 months after that date. So the timetable is set out in the full report that you can read, and we have a local plan submission date of April 2024, and hopefully an adoption of that plan in February 2025. So the revised timetable was considered and supported by our cross-party local plan working group last month, and I commend the local development scheme to the executive for publication as set out in the proposal.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Page. Okay. I couldn't agree more that when the news came out from the Secretary of State that they were prepared to consider such big changes, I think it was absolutely the right decision to put a hold on the plan, and I'm pleased to see that we're still well within the timescales required. Do we have any questions for Councillor Page? No? Okay, so members of the executive, as per 2.1, we're advised to resolve that the Surrey Heath Local Development Scheme, as attached to Annex 1 to this report, covering the period 23 to 26, be agreed and published on the website. Are we agreed? Thank you. All right, item 8, Local Authority Housing Fund. Councillor Croke.
Thank you, Leader. So this is brought to you. It is part of a 500 million government initiative to enable local authorities provide more affordable homes during 23 and 24. The aim of this funding is to alleviate increased housing pressures on local authorities, which have arisen as a result of the recent and unforeseen conflicts in Afghanistan and the Ukraine. Surrey Heath Borough Council has been provisionally allocated approximately 1.2 million funding to provide 7 affordable homes. One of these homes must be at least 4 bedrooms and must be allocated to a household currently living in bridging accommodation, for example, hotel. The remaining 6 homes must be provided to those who are homeless, at risk of homelessness, or who live in unsuitable temporary accommodation, including bridging accommodation, and who are accommodated via any of the following schemes. So our Afghan Citizen Resettlement Scheme, Afghan Relocation and Assistance Scheme, Ukraine Family Scheme, Homes for Ukraine, and the Ukraine Extension Scheme. Like many other local authorities, Surrey Heath Borough Council is at risk of significant housing pressures. This grant funding will enable us, through a third-party provider, to increase affordable housing provision. In particular, this funding will help to alleviate any immediate housing pressures arising from the Ukrainian crisis, and B, provide at least 1 new home for a household currently living in bridging accommodation via the Government Afghan Citizen Resettlement Scheme. Once the properties are no longer utilised by those selected from the eligible schemes, the homes will be available for use as long-term asset to meet local housing need. If the council was not to take part in this scheme, the housing need that the properties are designed to meet is likely to arise anyway. Therefore, the homes provided under this scheme would make a net positive contribution to the housing available within the borough, supporting the council in meeting the needs of its wider population. The timescales are crucial with this Memorandum of Understanding needing to be submitted by the 15th of March. This will ensure the initial funding amount will be received within this financial year. Once received, we will work with Mount Green Housing Association to source and secure suitable accommodation in accordance with the Constitution. A report will come back to Exec later in the year in relation to the requirement of acquisitions or disposals of land or property with a sale or purchase price in excess of 25,000, which are reserved to the council's executive. So what we're recommending is that we approve the council's participation in this local authority housing fund, approve the method of delivery of homes under the local authority housing fund, and it to be delegated to the strategic director of environment and community in consultation with the relevant portfolio holder, myself, and recommend that full council delegate to exec the drawdown of up to 80,000, including contingency, earmarked from the council's affordable housing reserve to subsidise the purchase price of property under the bridging element of the local authority housing fund scheme. So I hopefully ask that you will all approve this because A, it's coming from the government, it's something we should be behind, and we do need some more affordable properties coming into our borough, and obviously support for our Ukrainians and our other refugees. So I hope you will support me in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crowe. Okay, let's just see if there's any questions. No? Okay. All right. I think that you know, this is an incredible scheme. It's exactly what the borough needs, and I think you and the whole housing team actually need to be congratulated on moving so quickly to find a way of using the government's money. Thank you. Right. It costs us virtually nothing for us to end up with that number of houses, which is in a segment of the market that really needs it. So I think that's an excellent job. Okay. There's no questions. Councillor Croke's done it already. So members of the executive, we're asked to resolve small 1, small 2, and recommend to full council that up to £80,000, including contingency, be drawn down from the earmark from the council's affordable housing reserve. Are we agreed? Thank you. Right. Okay, item 9, community support from COMF and Emergency Food, Fuel and Energy Grant Scheme 23-24. Councillor Crowe.
Thank you, Leader. Sorry, me again. So members, I'm sure you will recall previous agenda items that have outlined proposals for local distribution of the Containment Outbreak Management Fund, which was introduced by the government to help support communities during the pandemic. The paper you have received outlines the background of this fund. Originally, the fund was to close on the 31st of March 2023. This has been extended by a further 12 months to the 31st of March 24, and Surrey Heath has a carry-forward balance of 280,000. If you recall, the executive previously agreed at the January and February exec to award revenue grant funding at a cost of 144,000 to local community organisations. And just to note, the 40,000 grant to the Hope Hub is being paid by the housing support team, so this is actually excluded from this figure. And the sum of 8,000 for a small grant to support the big lunch at the King's coronation in May. This leaves a balance of 126,000 for the executive to award this evening, and the agenda item suggests how we can provide additional support to our community for this coming year, which we all realise will be difficult due to the cost of living crisis. I would like to propose that the support is outlined as per 1.7 within the agenda item. This will ensure that as a council we are able to continue supporting our communities as much as possible with the resources and funding we have available. As we know, things change, so as portfolio holder, I'm suggesting that that should there be operational changes, for example, the support that we are suggesting for the workshop initiative, which may be funded by DWP. We're still waiting for the final outcome of this. If that comes through, we will still then have a further 72,000 to allocate, but this is unknown as yet. As per the agenda item, it's suggested that the operational decisions are delegated to Head of HR, Performance and Comms, and further specific details, if you want to read, will be in the papers. Lastly, seeking approval to extend the closing date of the existing Emergency Food Poverty Grant Scheme by 12 months to the 31st of March 24, or whenever the funds are exhausted, as we still have funds that are available. And you'll see set out, obviously the workshop is in there, community support working group, we've asked for some more banners, literature, supporting the cost of living events, which I've been part of within the town centre, Christmas hampers, which are very well received by the community, and support the hardship fund held by Citizens Advice Surrey Heath, family support team emergency help of 5,000 if families fall outside of the scope of charitable help. So I'm hoping that you will all support this going forward. Again, things aren't necessarily set in stone, things can change and we can work with that. So I'm asking for your support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick question on, you mentioned about the DWP could possibly fund the workshop initiative, which is 72k. So I'm right in saying that then if that happened, we'd have 72k.
Would still
Another
be in the pot.
proposal would come back.
Yeah.
And it would come back to the executive for the executive to approve what the 72k would be spent on.
Yeah.
Okay. We're not giving the officers and the portfolio holder 72k if that happens to be funded by DWP.
No, we will bring that back
Okay.
with
Okay.
other ideas. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, are there any other questions for Councillor Crowe? No. Okay. Right. So, members of the executive, we are advised to resolve, as Councillor Crowe has already done them, small 1 and small 2. Are we agreed? Thank you. Okay, Community Infrastructure Levy, Councillor Page. This is a supplementary paper.
Thank you, Leader. This report has been produced following the motion at full council on the 22nd of February, where it was requested the executive consider changing the policy for the allocation of community infrastructure levy funding so that each ward is allocated 45% of the SIL generated from the developments it takes. It was very interesting to see that motion come forward, and I congratulate Councillor Allaway for doing that. I know that as a councillor in West End that the rural parts of Surrey Heath have indeed taken a lot of housing, and we've done quite well to keep our housing numbers up to meet the targets that the government give us. And whilst we know that some of that SIL money goes to parished places, that's only 15%. And it seems fair to me that the argument that Councillor Allaway was making during the motion, it seemed fair to me that we should look at that again, and I'm glad that we have, and it's set out in this paper. So the report explores the scope for those parishes and wards that have had recent housing development to potentially have more of their local infrastructure funded from SIL. Now I know that in my own experience, certainly in West End, we had a lot of ticket items that the public wanted us to do, but there were some other ones that we couldn't quite stretch to. For instance, we couldn't quite stretch to providing a 20-mile-an-hour zone outside our village school. We couldn't quite stretch to a crossing there, and to date that school still suffers with parking problems. It's a bit of a rat run from the A322 to the Bagshot Road, and we do often see the local police down there to try and calm the nerves of people and stop some of the road rage incidents. Now, if West End had that 45%, we may have been able to stretch to put in that infrastructure, that very special infrastructure and the very legal infrastructure that the regulations allow us to do. So if the executive are minded to amend the SIL policy to provide the scope of local infrastructure funding up to 45% compared to the current 15%, that would benefit people who are taking houses. Now, don't forget, houses can be built in all people's areas and wards, so that 45% would be gained in other areas as well, not just the West End infrastructure that I harp on about. So my recommendation to you, having read that, is to support in total Councillor Allaway's motion. And if you look at the paper at 6.1, the proposal for the options, option 2, to amend the SIL policy to allow parish and wards that have had recent housing development the scope to put forward proposals to the executive for local infrastructure up to the maximum value of 45%. And that's from the SIL generated in that area. There is a caveat, obviously, that if the projects don't come forward, or they're not allowed by other agencies because there are different contingencies, then that money after 3 years will go straight back into the pot to be shared out with the other wards and districts around Surrey Heath. So that's the recommendation, Leader. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Page. I can see this is near and dear to your heart. Okay, I'm going to go straight to Councillor Allaway because it was his motion. Sorry, Councillor Bates, I see your hands up first, but I think it's right that we go to Councillor Allaway for his motion, since it was his motion. Councillor Allaway, if you would like to.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it sounds like you can. Yes, well, I'm really pleased that the executive is considering this change to policy. And let me express my thanks to everyone involved in both the motion and this paper for the I don't know, effort and time that you've put into this, because I think it's something very dear to ward councillors' hearts to be able to improve their infrastructure within their ward. And yes, everyone could benefit from this, because not only do wards generate development and still get a better slice of it, but the pooling option also does increase substantially as well. So I think even wards that don't take development can apply for things to be done in their area and apply to a bigger fund. So it should be win-win for all. And yeah, I hope the executive supports little 2 and little 3 options. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allaway. Councillor Bates.
Thank you. I mean, I support the motion as I did in the council, but I would just make one additional point, which you may wish to consider, I suppose, as little v or something like that, which is basically this issue regarding urban wards. Because I entirely agree with Councillor Page and Allaway that if a development takes place in the centre of West End, then the priority should be to support West End. I mean, that to me is obvious. But in urban areas, the demarcation of ward boundaries is not necessarily as clear. And although it may be clear on a map, it's not clear in terms of the impact to the local community. So I suppose I would suggest, I can't put this forward, but I would suggest maybe add a further principle for the review, which is along the lines of that urban wards in particular may not have boundaries that are directly relevant to the application, or sorry, the development site, and to consider a proximity area instead. So, i.e., and the case I've used it before, and I guess I'll have one final time of using it, which is that a site might be right on the boundary line of Old Dean, but happen to be in Town Ward. Now, and that the development impact is therefore in Old Dean, but Town gets all the money. Now, I completely agree that West End is different and rural communities are clearly marked out, but I just think that principle needs to be considered going forward. But I do want to make clear I support the emphasis on local communities getting more of the pot. I know the impact to the borough, but nonetheless, I do think it's fair.
Thank you, Councillor Bates. Okay, any other comments? Okay, all right. Okay, so let me just take it. Councillor Allaway, thank you for your positive comments and your support. I know that you and I and Mr. Roberts had a number of meetings on this, and we went round and round it. Okay, I do think that the motion itself in this chamber, and even as we've discussed it this evening, lays out the case for giving the wards that have taken a lot of development more SIL. Okay, and that, of course, is the thrust of the motion. It was the thrust of the paper tonight. I think it's just worth saying there is a whole other argument for not doing it, which I am really pleased this paper just finds the way through that, which manages to balance everything. Okay, and as with all balancing tricks, you know, it's not as cut and dried, and there's some compromises on both sides. I know Councillor Allaway worked very hard to get his point of view across, but was very magnanimous in understanding there were other priorities. And one of them is that the fund for SIL is used by the council in order to demonstrate to the government and Surrey County Council that we can afford future development. We use it for match funding when there's development, etc. So it's very important that fund stays very healthy and isn't then just simply broken up. And the fact that this is, the 15% is earmarked, but the additional 30% is where you can apply for it and you've got a specific project, I think works really well, and it allows the whole thing to work. And I'm afraid I'm on record as saying, in a negotiation, the next best thing to everybody being happy is everyone being equally unhappy. And we came out of the negotiations with everyone equally unhappy, which I thought was a good result. Your point, Councillor Bates, about urban, I think I've agreed with that point multiple times when you've said it, all right, that it's possible for the ward to take the development, but the road that is having trouble taking the traffic can run through its neighbour. But I do think that actually, I've got two problems with your suggestion. One is, I think we're opening up a whole can of worms to start talking about what is rural and what is urban. I think you can take West End and you can take Town and everybody's clear. But then it starts to get a bit fuzzier with things like Deep Cut and, you know, Frimley and Frimley Green and Lightwater. So I'm just nervous of that. But the second thing is that this paper allows people who haven't taken the development to also apply for more money. So I think it gives the scope right across the board. And I wish we had had this some time ago. Councillor Allaway made a very, very strong point during the council meeting that you can, SIL money is supposed to incentivise our residents, or at least give them a reason for accepting it, because they know that some infrastructure will come. But the way it currently works is, if you haven't had any development, then there's no SIL in your ward. When you have a lot of development, you get a lot of SIL, but that's immediately earmarked for future development in your ward. You notice in those switches there that at no time did we spend SIL actually on the ward that got the development. So I think this is a very, very good paper, and I think it sets us up for a much, much more equitable system going forward, and I would certainly support it. Now, my habit of allowing the councillor, I forgot that there. Councillor Bates, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's not something I feel that strongly about, and it's not my issue going forward anyway. I don't think it's that difficult to work out an urban and rural ward. I mean, I think, frankly, councillors have been doing that for many years. But look, in terms of moving this forward, I think the key, where there is absolutely unanimity, is to make sure that money is spent in the local community which has taken the application. And I think we all agree with that. It's just a matter of how we define that going forward. My view remains, I think, that within urban areas in particular, you draw a circle, if you like, and then you prioritise it around there. I appreciate that might be a bit more complicated, but look, at the end of the day, if you want to move forward in a different way, then that's fine.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, if there's no more questions then, members of the executive. Now, this is a little trickier than we normally have. Okay, so we're advised to resolve either 1 or 2, and we are proposing 2. Okay, so we're advised to resolve that ignore small 1, small 2, small 3, and small 4 are resolved. Are we agreed? Thank you. Right, item 11, fair trade status. Councillor Garrett, we're back onto the main agenda.
Thank you, Leader. As you know, the Council passed a motion in April 22 stating that Surrey Heath Borough Council would apply for fair trade status by March 23. I believe this was passed unanimously. The motion, however, was predicated upon us achieving fair trade status at no additional cost to the Council. Subsequent investigation by the officers has shown that, in fact, there are associated costs on purchasing fair trade goods and running fair trade events and campaigns promoting the scheme. Additional costs to the Council are detailed in section 5, but would come in around £38,000. The paper lays out 3 options. A, effectively modify the motion to include the expenditure of a 38k. B, decide not to pursue fair trade status now that the costs have been established. C, not progress the application for formal fair trade status but adopt the principles of fair trade. While I feel option C is the way to go, I believe it is appropriate for the Executive to pass this back to full Council to consider the options and decide how it wants to proceed. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so this was Councillor Bates' original motion, so I'd like to invite Councillor Bates if he would like to talk.
Yes, thank you. I mean, firstly, can I just confirm that I have been consulted regarding this paper, as has been outlined in the recommendation, and I've had helpful discussions both with Mr. Watson and with Councillor Garrett about this. I think it's fair to say that this hasn't progressed as quickly as I personally would have hoped, and I'm personally disappointed about that. The reasons I think for that, without going into great detail, is I think there was an initial difference of view regarding the way that this motion was interpreted. And as you've just heard, I think that still remains. Having said that, because I certainly don't think the costs that have been outlined are necessary and were ever necessary, in fact. So I would very strongly encourage you not to go for option A, because I don't think that's justified and never was. Where I do think there is a lot of common ground is regarding areas that are outlined in option C. As a result of that, and clearly we are therefore not going to be able, as I had hoped a year ago, to get to the point where we will be in a position to put forward a proposal to the Fair Trade, to say we'll be ready by the 31st of March, or I can't remember the exact date it was. And therefore it is inevitable that we now need to put that date back and to put forward a different proposal for that. So I certainly agree with that aspect as well. My view is that in reality, this is again going to be, as has been the theme of the meeting really, for the new council to decide what they want to do. It is in the 5-year plan, so it is something which is a priority for the council, but it will be for the councillors to decide how much of a priority it would be. I think it's a pity, I suppose, that over the last year, those councillors, and it was unanimously agreed by the council, we haven't been able to move this forward as we as the people who had the drive and the enthusiasm, and obviously we'll see who is elected in May and whether they have that energy and drive to move this forward. And that will really be a matter for them. But in terms of the specific recommendation before you, I would agree that option C is the way forward. And assuming that you do refer this to the full council, then that would be I will be articulating the same at that meeting as well.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bates. Are there any other comments or questions? So the recommendation is that we send it back to full council, and we just asked the council. You know, we know the conversation we had, which was, will this cost us anything? The indication was, or the belief was at the time, that it wouldn't. And you're right, the officers have now reviewed this and are now advising us that it will cost something. So this paper is saying, let's put it back to full council and see if they want to spend the money or go for option C, which is the light, isn't it? The go for everything but the actual certification, which is where the cost is. Okay? So I'm perfectly prepared to support the paper, but to be honest, Councillor Bates, you just opened up a little door there that I wondered if we wanted to go through, which is, if it went back to full council, you would be speaking for it to be option C. Councillor Garrett would be proposing that it's option C. We haven't talked about this extensively, but I would be saying option C. I wonder if we would be overstepping if the executive took the view that actually what we should do, given the delay, it's been a year, let's understand that, it's been a year since the motion was passed, that I wonder if the executive should in actual fact say, we're going to go ahead, but we'll do option C, which is the manifestation of the council's motion. Right? Okay? Because I have a strong feeling that we would send it back to the council. We'd all argue for option C, including the person who put the motion forward in the first place, which we know carries a lot of weight in the chamber, and we'd all vote option C, and we could take care of that now by saying, let's go ahead with option C. Councillor Bates?
Well, I'm delighted if you think that the person proposing the motion has such a authority in such cases. I'm not totally sure that's always correct, but in terms of the specific proposal, I mean, I think I would agree with it in the sense of that it avoids any issue of PERDA, which will actually occur during the next meeting. As far as I'm aware, this isn't a party political matter and has never been, as you'll remember, it was unanimously agreed. There is a slight kind of constitutional area which you, I suppose you may have had whispered in your ear, but is because this was a motion of council and it refers to a date, then it may be that that aspect relating to the date just needs to be formally amended. I'm quite happy personally that you decide tonight to move on with option C. It clearly is not going to be feasible, whatever has happened in the past, for it to be done in the next 15, 20 days. So it is inevitably going to be delayed beyond that. And I am therefore quite happy for you to kind of formally on behalf of the council move forward with option C, particularly as it is now in the 5-year plan.
Okay. Having just opened that door, a little crack, okay, you saw that the chief executive whispered in my ear something along the lines of, "What are you doing?" Okay, I've been informed that it is right and proper that it goes back to the executive for two reasons. One is we would be changing the motion, and two, because remember the motion was to actually go for certification, so we'd be changing the motion. And secondly, it was by a certain date, and we'd be choosing a different date. So we're actually changing the motion in two different ways, which I'm advised is not exactly the executive's role. Councillor Garrett?
I've also been whispering while you've been talking. We might be able to suggest that full council goes with option C rather than taking A, B. We go with suggestion to take option C to the full council.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think whatever we want to suggest, I don't think it matters. I think it's just a case of that. So I think, sorry for that round the houses there, Councillor Bates, but we're going to go back to the recommendation in the paper. All right. If there's no other questions, I'm not seeing any. Okay. So members of the executive were advised to recommend to full council that the options in section 3 of this report are considered by the council, and that council is asked to determine how it wishes to proceed with the motion previously moved. Are we agreed? Okay. Right, thank you. Item 12, Councillor Perry, Revenue Budget 22-23, Monitoring Report, Quarter 3.
Thank you, Leader. This paper is a summary of the borough's budget and financial performance for the first 3 quarters of the financial year 22-23, i.e. the period up to the 31st of December 22. As members will have seen in the paper, of the working budget for the whole year was 14.926 million. The actual for the first 9 months was 10.585 million. This is obviously a significant fall in the average running rate originally expected. Full details of the actual numbers are provided in the report. At the half-year stage, the year-end forecast was an overspend of 300k, and the current year-end forecast is now an underspend of 117k. Given the increasing impact of inflation, this is a very good result. The Star Chamber exercise and the very positive attitude from the whole borough team has really helped in a very difficult environment. The report is also a good indicator that the planned savings and improvements included in next year's budget have a good foundation. So the executive is asked to note the report, but I'm happy to answer any queries there may be.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Okay. Councillor Malvaginam.
Thank you, Leader. Again, this is a paper which should have come to PNF. We got the PNF tomorrow, and it'll be discussed at the PNF. It's like putting the cart before the horse again. So I don't know why we are discussing this paper. I know there's a time sort of issue here because the council comes to an end very soon. This council comes to an end very soon. I don't know how we want to tackle it at the PNF. We will discuss it at the PNF, but I think it should have been left until the PNF was held, or exec meeting should have been postponed at least by a day to actually accommodate that process to carry on, because that's, I thought, was a process we all agreed is the right way to do it. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Malvaginam, yeah, I take your point. The quarterly reports are put into the diary of the executive at the start of the fiscal year, and this has been quarter 3's review date. I don't know how we got out of sync, but what I would say is, of course, if there's any recommendations, notes, etc., come from PNF, then I'm happy to see those at the next executive. So they won't be wasted. Your conversation or discussion tomorrow night won't be wasted. Okay. Are there any other questions on the paper? No? Okay. So, members of the executive were advised to resolve that the spend against the approved revenue budget for the period 1st of April to 31st December 2022 and the year end of predicted forecast to full year outturn be noted. Do we note it? Thank you. Councillor Perry, you again for the same thing for the capital budget monitoring report.
Thank you, Leader. This report details the capital spend versus budget for the year 22-23 at the Q3 stage, i.e. up to 31st December 22. It also details the 7.853 million of capital projects originally in the budget for the year that are to be reprofiled into later years, subject to approval of the Executive and Council. The revised capital budget for the year after this reprofiling became 2.802 million. As at the end of Q3, actual spend and firm commitments amounted to 1.945 million, and this is 69% of the revised budget. Forecast outturn for the year is now 2.431 million against the full year revised budget of 2.802 million, which was 86.8%. A detailed breakdown of the 22-23 capital spend forms part of the report. The executive is asked to note the report and the reprofiling of the detailed projects that the executive will be asked to approve at its meeting on the 30th of May. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And I think we should probably just note that Councillor Malvaganam's point on the revenue budget and P&F is probably just as valid for this paper for P&F tomorrow night. Okay. Councillor Bates?
Thank you. In the attachment with very small writing, there's a reference to the various increased security measures within the parks. And you'll recall that this was actually agreed some months ago, I think possibly even a year ago. Can't remember exactly when it was. But I noticed that most of them have either not progressed or alternatively, I think some of these, the local community have decided not to proceed with. So will there be a saving in that pot at the end of the day?
Leader, thank you very much. Councillor Bates, thank you for your question. If the money isn't allocated and we don't anticipate there being a demand for further work of that type, then that money will go back into the council's reserves and potentially be reallocated to other capital schemes in the future.
Okay. I think the security you were talking about was to do with unauthorised encampments. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay. So, members of the executive were advised to resolve that, small one, the spend against the approved capital programme for the period 1st of April to 31st of December 2022 be noted, and the proposed reprofiling of budgets to later years that the executive will be asked to approve at its meeting on the 30th of May 2023 be noted. Are we so inclined? Yeah. Great, thank you. Okay. Item 14, write-off of irrecoverable bad debts. Councillor Perry.
Thank you again, Leader. This paper seeks the Executive's approval to write off debts that, despite having been through a vigorous collection regime, have reached a stage where they can no longer be considered good debts and an asset of the borough. A detailed list of all the accounts concerned is attached. 142,692 relates to council tax bad debts, and 178,543 relates to non-domestic or business rate debts. Although this sounds a great deal, it is only a very small proportion of our total council tax and business rates annual billing, which exceeds more than £100 million. The write-off is shared by all the recipients of the two taxes in the same proportions that they receive from collections. A very thorough process is followed before we get to this stage to try and ensure that we do collect everything that is due. But we don't never get 100%, nor does anybody else. In the financial year 21-22, the total business rates collected equated to 99.7% of that billed, and council tax collected equated to 98.4% of that billed. This performance puts our finance team in the top performing group of local authorities in the whole country. The executive is asked to approve the write-off, but obviously I'm happy to answer any questions that may.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Let me just give you the normal warning that obviously the members have in front of them the annex, which gives the details of the debts and the profile. That can't be talked about in any specific way in this part, and it can be discussed in detail in part 2. Obviously, it's private for those individuals. So are there any questions for Councillor Perry on the write-off of the debt? No. Okay. I just have one. It's an inquiry. I noticed in 1.4 that we have it where individual amounts greater than £1,500
Yep.
is there, and it talks about Financial Regulation 26.1. Does that 26.1 regulation, this is perhaps a question for Mr. Watson, who suddenly picked up. Right? Where's this going? Really what I'm getting at is £1,500 is now a very low amount of money. If that was set 10 years ago, okay, it's ridiculous for it to be £1,500 today when it was £1,500 10 years ago. But I see that one of them, Financial Regulations 26.1, requires bad debts in excess of £1,500. Does that cover both? Are we locked into £1,500 on both of them? Or could we ask for a review that you could take it, if you said it was 3,000, for instance, 60% of these would disappear from this paper? Bearing in mind that the finance team are already writing off anything up to 1499, aren't they? Without reporting it back to us.
Leader, you're correct. Currently, the financial regulations give authority to myself as the council's chief finance officer to write off anything up to £1,500. There is a mismatch in the financial regulations in that write-off of stock up to a value of 5,000 is in the remit of the chief finance officer. It's normally, and I'm not saying it's the case here, that most councils do not like the idea that an officer has such power vested upon them to write off that amount of money. But I would suggest that the financial regulations are reviewed with a intention to increase the amount to reduce the admin burden on this committee.
Are they our financial regulations 26.1?
They are financial regulations set by the council in its constitution, and are due to be reviewed in the next year.
They're due to be reviewed.
Yes.
I'm more than happy that that happens, but something that I can't see in the report that would absolutely need to be in the report, in particular if we're going to move 1,500, is how much has Mr. Watson chosen to write off? It's not in the report.
So the everything up to £1,500 that's been written off is not actually in this report. Okay. Okay, so there's a can of worms just been opened. All right.
No,
you're
fine.
welcome.
I can provide that figure back to yourselves at the committee, or share it with the committee after the meeting. I'll need to go back to the team and work out what we have written off. It shouldn't actually be that much because we don't tend to, it's mainly the bigger debts that we wait until they come to a number, then we put in front of people here anyway. But I will get that figure for you and share it with the committee.
I think given the fact that you are reviewing the Financial Regulations 26.1, I think my question would be, when was £1,500 set? Okay, and what would be a reasonable sum? And for a steer, I would think something like 3,000 would be a reasonable number, right? That we can, you know, you're right. We allow you to write off £5,000 worth of stock, but only £1,500 worth of council tax, bad debt. Okay. First of all, those numbers should kind of, you know, align. And secondly, I do think that £1,500 is. I've sat through many of these, and I don't think once have we actually ever queried. You know, we've queried the process, but we've never actually queried the decision to write it off. So I think it would be worth reviewing. Okay, Councillor Perry.
The amount actually doesn't matter that much.
Yeah, no, I agree, The fact that you're talking about 98.4, 99.3, I mean, that's a staggering amount. Yeah, yeah. And I know from history that you see the effort that's gone into to recovering these, so I just think it would be worth clearing that report up. Okay, if there are no other questions around this, then oh, sorry, Councillor Duggan.
I will ask a question, and it's going to be, it's just avoid to ask the question specifically in part 2, but I don't think it matters. But it's fairly obvious to anyone who reads the detail that there are two companies, both owned by the same people, who seem to have, and having had a quick scan on the internet, set up a scam where they rent houses and then rent out the houses and probably charge the council tax and then don't pay us. Are we not able to spot these things before it becomes, there must be 30,000, 40,000 pounds worth of debt in here, and having seen that the company, they're not specifically Surrey Heath, they operate, I mean, they're registered, one of their offices is registered in London. You know, they'll be a relatively big company. We should be spotting these, especially given that a lot of them were into 3 years worth of debt, and we need to work out a way of stopping that.
Okay, Councillor Perry.
Yes, we've discussed this at length with Mr. Watson. We're discussing, are there ways of doing this? For instance, I suggested maybe we could take anybody who wanted to have council tax billed to a limited company should provide a personal guarantee of the managing director or whatever. Another factor is that most of the tenants of these multiple occupied properties, which is what they are, tend to be people that if we foreclosed on the property, they would all be out on the street and we would have the cost of providing accommodation for them. So there's a balance of benefit to us on the two sides there, which do it. It happens, but very occasionally, and it's quite a small percentage of the total we're looking at. It's one of these awkward ones.
I do see what you're saying, and I like the idea that if someone wants their council tax booked to a limited company, then that's a red flag, isn't it? Okay.
Correct. I think Mr. Watson believes it's not legally possible at the moment, but we're going to have another look at it.
Okay. Thank you. All right, let's get to the recommendation. Okay, we're advised to resolve that bad debts totalling £142,692.13 in respect of council tax and £178,543.89 in respect of non-domestic rates be approved for write-off. Are we agreed? Great. Thank you. Okay, that takes us to item 15, which is exclusion of press and public. Okay, any members of the public who have joined us, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. We are now going to